Thank you, everyone. And I just want to welcome you all to this event addressing transformative change as a part of the United Nations 2030 agenda. This is a contribution to the Summit of the Future as well. Like we said, 2030 is when the world is supposed to deliver on the SDGs, the national targets under the Paris Agreement, the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and other important agreements. These intertwined global frameworks are, in a sense, a master plan to create a better future for humanity, a future of harmony with nature and each other. However, with only 17% of the SDGs currently on track and over 1/3 stalled or going in reverse, it has become clear that without a fundamental human shift, it will not be possible to transform our world and reach the 2030 agenda. Foundation Corte Solar, Mary Foundation, and Velux Fonden started the journey on a North-South cooperation years back to drive the change in order to highlight the need for environmental philanthropists and cross-sectoral cooperation to contribute to the UN processes. And this is sort of our fourth event on this issue, which we will continue here. In this regard, we hope that this side event will aim to stimulate discussion and enhance understanding about what this really means and entails, and to consider the way forward. So transformation is really our main topic here today. So firstly, I want to say thank you to all our panelists. We are so pleased that you could all be here. And we will have Juan Carlos Navarro, Minister of Environment from Panama, to give the keynote speech. The minister is a leading figure in Panama, recognized by the Time and CNN as a top Latin American leader. He founded Panama's foremost environmental NGO, ANCON, in '85, and co-funded Solar in 2014, an innovative solar energy startup, as well as the Solar Energy Association of Panama, where he served as its first president. Navarro was elected 2 terms as mayor of Panama City from 1999 to 2009, and is now Panama's Minister of Environment, overseeing the country's conservation efforts and climate strategy. With degrees from Dartmouth and Harvard and fluent in 3 languages, Navarro's career bridges public services, environmental advocacy, renewable energy, and private sector leadership. And we are so pleased that you were able to join us. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos, especialmente a Francisca, por la invitación. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time and for being here, for the wonderful work that you do. Having said that, we are headed for disaster, and we all know it. There is no way that we can make the 2030 deadline. This is simply reality. We keep meeting, we keep going to the UN, we keep holding hands and wishing for the best, but we have not seen the effective transformative change that we need. And everyone is responsible, we all are. In our own countries, where most of the biodiversity is, either in the equator or south of the equator, there is so much to be done, and we know what it is. Yet, as we speak here today, the Amazon is burning. We have not done our own homework in our countries. We have not guaranteed protection of our natural heritage and the irreplaceable species that need our forests and oceans and coasts and rivers and lakes and environments to survive. So we are guilty, and we're responsible for our part of not doing enough and not doing it fast enough. But our neighbors here in New York and to the north are absolutely responsible for giving us a warming climate and a warming planet, for gifting us climate change, for gifting us climate extremes, and for not doing anything about it, except, of course, the periodic meeting at the UN, where we all come and talk about the problems we have and all of the beautiful things that we think about, but not about the concrete steps we're willing to take to fix the problem, starting with a true, effective transfer of resources from the north to the south for specific targeted programs that will guarantee the conservation of our biodiversity, will help promote green jobs, will guarantee private sector participation, and will allow us a rapid transition to green economy and to sustainable and clean energy and to sustainable transportation. Many of the topics surrounding these issues are quite complicated, scientifically, technically, and I'm afraid that we have spent a lot of time in the nuances. Oh, let's talk again about these aspects of the formula of calculating carbon sequestration. Yes, we can spend eons talking about these things, but in the meantime, our oceans are being trashed, literally. Have we truly done something about plastics? Will something get done at the upcoming conference? Are we taking desertification seriously? Or are we taking the free air travel to Saudi Arabia? What will this conference achieve? Except one more conference and tons of carbon from the airplanes and their flights and their footprint. Do we really need to talk about desertification, climate, and biodiversity separately, Astrid? Wouldn't it make more sense, guys, Valerie? Shouldn't we talk about these three things together? This is Panama's position. From now on, as Macaros Monterrey, our climate negotiator, just deposited this in Rio. Shouldn't we talk about the three things together and do it simply and quickly? I am very much aware of the time. I have this ticking clock, tick-tock in my head. I've been minister now for almost 3 months. I am exasperated by our slowness and the bureaucracy that is eating us alive in my own country and also internationally and in many other countries. I feel that time is of the essence, and I do not get the feeling that this urgency has been appropriately and adequately communicated to the private sector, to our own public sector leaders, nor has it been appropriately communicated to civic leaders. And I think that citizens and the private sector, in many instances, think of this as being a problem for governments. We come here in September and we go to the Deepak Chopra seminary where I was, which was fantastic, by the way. Breathe in, breathe out, beautiful people. But when we go back to our homes, we figure in our minds, climate change, check. I went to the seminary, I spent a day in New York, went in my private plane, of course, with my own carbon footprint, and it's done. Now it's a government's problem because it's a public problem. And this is part of the problem. It's that we have never figured out how to deal with the commons, with the classic conundrum of who takes care of the commons, who takes care of the green, who takes care of the air or the common heritage of mankind. And this is why I think private citizens, private businesses, business leaders tend to think of the environment, the loss of biodiversity, I should say the savage, absolutely unacceptable loss of biodiversity, the critical climate extremes which we are living, and the advancing desertification as somebody else's problem. That's not my problem. That's the government's problem. I pay taxes. That's my responsibility. Check. And we as public sector leaders have the responsibility of helping private sector leaders understand and be conscious of the fact that if we don't get them on board, we ain't going anywhere. And this is why, mi querida Francisca, es tan importante lo que tú haces y tu liderazgo. Your leadership is so important because you see both sides of the table. As a business person and also as an environmentalist, you are very clear on what we need to do to advance our agenda. And so, with these brief remarks, I want to underline the urgency of our mission. I would like to shout out to action at every level. If we all do this at our country level, we fix the problem. But we really need to do it, and these are tough decisions. I used to be a politician, and I've given up politics. And now I can tell the truth all the time. I don't have to worry about, boy, how will this be interpreted in the media? What will our constituents say? So now, for me, it is a bit easier to simply call a spade a spade. And this is what I have done here today. I think it is urgent, no matter what the political cost, that we take the steps that we need to take locally to make sure that every one of us in every one of our countries, be it Chile, be it Panama, any and every one, or Estonia, any and every one of our countries, on peut parler aussi de la France, de le travail que tu fais. Nosotros tenemos absolutamente que hacer lo que tenemos que hacer en nuestros países. This has to work at the local level, and we absolutely must do what we need to do at the local level. If we do this, if we start talking simultaneously about climate, biodiversity, and desertification, and we start cutting out the BS and the speeches, here I am saying it in a speech, we start focusing on concrete actions, and we get the private sector involved, I think that we have a chance. Maybe we won't have a chance to make it by 2030. But if we all take responsibility for what we need to do, we do have a chance. And this is what I ask you to help me with. So there's no time, and so I don't speak no more.
Thank you so much, Minister Navarro. Yeah, I think it's really timely to say that we are pressed for time to achieve the 2030 targets. And I think that in that regards, as coming from two foundations, we also know how important it is to bridge the gap to industry and other sectors, for them all to take responsibilities in the way forward, and to conserve and preserve the marine environment, the environment in general, and the earth. With that regards, I think it's timely to give Astrid Schumacher, Executive Secretary of the Secretariat of Convention on Biological Diversity, the word. As Astrid, you have a really important meeting coming up very soon, and in South America. And so I was just wondering, because it's not that long ago that we finally adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework. And how do you see that we can accelerate the transformation to achieve our targets? Thank you so much, Astrid, the word yours.
That was a difficult act to follow, but I mean, I think what you've been saying just reflects a couple of fundamental truths, starting with the urgency of action and the unrecognized urgency of action, and starting with the idea action is always first. I think that those are some of the conundrums we're facing in this debate. I've also spent the last 10 years of my life in front of a poster saying global challenge, local action. And I think this is really what this is all about. And this is where Kari comes in with our COP16. So, as I think most of you will know, we do have a global biodiversity framework. And I think the recognition of this global biodiversity framework is, it's gorgeous to have it. Those were ambitious commitments. It was a beautiful moment in Montreal that we lived in 2022. Surprising in a way, because geopolitics was already sort of coming in and making things difficult. And yet, at that moment, the world came together and made commitments of an extent and the nature that we expected, including numerical commitments on very important issues, such as finance and such as harmful substances. So that is very important. Now, the implementation of these commitments, and that was the other, in a way, amazing thing in Montreal, and in a way, taking a faster step maybe than the climate convention, that immediately we sort of came up with a monitoring framework. And we immediately said we already have some plans. All these plans now have to be revised. These are the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plans. And they need to actually reflect the targets that have now been adopted, and countries need to reflect their own national targets in a whole of government approach. And that is important because that then brings in the business sector and brings in everybody else and gives a role to everybody, because that is in fact, in our view, the key to success. Not that the Environment Ministry writes a plan, or that somebody stands up and says the situation is urgent, but that society comes together and says we have an urgent problem that we can also only all tackle together. That's true at the national level as it is true at the global level. We can only tackle these issues if we come together as nations. Now, I think your direct challenge to me is, do we need a separate framework? I said, no, we don't need to do this separately, and I don't think we should be doing it separately. And I believe that all three conventions and the global debate is moving towards saying doing it separately is not the best way forward. Now we need to be clear, nobody now wants to sort of start saying we want to abolish one convention or the other. They've been there. They can shine the spotlight of specific facets of a global urgent crisis, but they're still looking at one crisis that needs to be tackled together. Now, the difficulty that I would see in the Secretariat, and by the way, I've been around for 3 months and I'm exasperated by the slowness of the pages. I think that's part of the system. Nonetheless, I'm also still optimistic, because this discussion on synergies, which started many, many years ago and was dormant and now comes back, is actually very, very active, is driven forward by the presidencies of the conventions, is supported by the Secretariat. But at the moment, we're still facing a bizarre situation that when we then have the decision text where countries say, well, now we're going to lift these synergies, we have a text full of brackets, and in fact, the text is quite empty. And that's worrying. So what we think we need is countries to be able to bring their national planning, monitoring processes together. So not a separate biodiversity strategy, a separate NDC, a separate adaptation plan, a separate finance plan for this sector and for that sector and the other, but they need a joint up planning process. But of course, most countries of the world need support in these planning processes, and they get the support through different mechanisms that are supported by different conventions and that relate then to separate projects. So countries in the global south have to come with a project to UNDP or to UN and say, I want to do an NDC, and come with another project, I want to do the MBSAP, and come with a third project for adaptation. And then they create these 3 project committees, and the 3 flows go in these 3 separate things. So I think what we need, and what we really need coming out of this autumn of the BO trio, starting with a conference in Cali, is that the conventions get mandates from their parties to say, look, guys, we want to bring these processes together at national level. We must bring them together for the sake of effectiveness and efficiency and not to waste the scarce resources we have. Please, as conventions, come and help us and bring the international finance system together to also not come with separate projects, but to bring this all debate together. So then, if we could do that, that would be a big step forward. And then, as you said, I mean, bringing everybody together, so this famous whole of government approach. Colombia, as our co-host, is doing an amazing job. Colombia is committed. There's another Latin American minister who knows how to talk like you do, who can do it in several languages. Susana Mohammed, who can explain the crisis as an urgent crisis, who can motivate people, who has already achieved a massive mobilization of Colombian civil society, especially the indigenous groups. She's organizing the whole process of pre-COPs, etc. I think all of Latin America is mobilized. We have the access to Brazil, this famous COP16 to COP30. So there is willingness, we believe, also on the part of Brazil to start bringing these agendas together. So I think with Cali, we can bring an important step forward. Now, of course, and that will, in a way, I finish maybe with that, we are still facing the huge global trust divide. So that is very clear, and that is also one issue that is sometimes holding us back in the synergies, because we very quickly come to this discussion that people are concerned that, you know, the global north spends $50 on climate change and wants them to also count as $50 for biodiversity, thereby escaping the commitments on biodiversity finance that was made. And there may be truth in that, or there may not be, but in any case, we all know ODA finance is really under pressure, so they're in a difficult situation. Philanthropy is stepping up, but the finance gap is huge. You know, the finance gap for biodiversity was at 700 billion, like for philanthropy, private funding, etc. We are 120 per year, maybe 130. ODA has a commitment of 20 billion by 25. We don't think we'll meet it. It's rising, but the gap is there. So all of us need to come together and have a discussion on recognizing that yes, we need to spend more money, but while we raise this more money, we also all need to come together and spend the money we have in a way that we can tackle more than one issue at a time. Nature-based solutions, all the discussion around, and I finish on it. You say we lose a lot of time on details. It is equally frustrating how much time we use on semantics. Whether things is called nature-based solutions, or whether they're called an ecosystem-based approach, or whatever. We have so much discussion on words. It will be very important that people just focus on the urgency and on the concepts that move on. And maybe one last point of optimism for our COP. We have an important decision on digital sequencing information. Very technical subject. It's about access and benefit sharing for benefiting from nature and then giving back to nature. And there's a very, very interesting debate about how we can set up this fund, which is already agreed in principle, but how we can operationalize it. And a very interesting discussion on disbursement modalities, and maybe moving away from project funding and looking at criteria such as biodiversity, richness, and needs, and etc., and having some formula. That can be a discussion that can take another 10 years, also because it's a voluntary mechanism at this point, because understandably many people want a binding mechanism. But we can either discuss this for another 10 years, and maybe have to create a perfect system, or we can start somewhere very pragmatically and small, start changing mindsets, take from nature, give back to nature, and we give back to those countries that give you that in the first place. And then you see how it works and you improve over time. If we can come, and then you need to trust each other that the voluntary mechanism will actually happen. Of course, there will be free riders and people that, but the important thing is to start somewhere and to get going, start raising these funds, transferring these funds, and then see how it works and how we can expand it. And if COP16 can do that, then I think in this question on whether we want to make 2030 or not, we can add a little bit to the scale of, say, the glasses of full.
Thank you so much, Esther. And I think it's timely that you were mentioning multilateralism, because UNEP were always adopted the decision in March on the synergies between conventions. And I think that's also why we as foundation thought it was important not only to have CBD, not only to have UNEP around the table, but of course also have interlinked to the Paris Protocol. And with that, I want to give the word to Abdallah. And Abdallah, I want to ask you about the transformational adaptation, how it includes the work of IPCC with regard to changing the fundamental attributes of socio-ecological system in anticipation of climate change and its impact, and how we actually link the work that we're doing on all conventions. And as like Astrid says, we need to not work in silos, but we need to work together. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. For me, I think it is a real pleasure to be here. And I will be a little bit different because I want to structure my intervention in four, items. The first one, it is simple, it's greeting. Second one is key funding for my IPCC 6 cycle. Third is SDGs and also the relation with IPCC, and I will touch on what you say. And fourth one is what is the future for IPCC and how we can do the transformation. But let me highlight the following, the greetings. And I want really to draw the attention, just to ask everybody to look for this thing. I am really honored. I'm honored to have Your Excellency the Minister. I have the head of this philanthropy, and I'm also pleased to see sort of segmentation. All the people interested in climate change. We have the museum, we have the World Bank, We have UNEP, our parent organization, with the WMO. Now, I want to highlight something which is really important, and this is linked to Mary Foundation. We have a representative for Chile, and I think it shows how it is a good correlation, the relationship between the country and philanthropy. And then we have also CBD and United Nations in general, and that show if I have to make a sort of evaluation from 8 years in the past, and now progress is there. We can say who are, the responsible for this positive thing. I think you are here in time. And I really, from IPCC side, I should really thank, Francisca and Mary for excellent contribution for you to help science, to help the IPCC to make the voice of science for climate change as useful as possible, not only for United Nations negotiator, but also for all stakeholders. So this is, I think, for the great things. Now I am going to the key funding for 6th cycle. We spent the past 8 years with COVID to deal with, to produce our package of 6th cycle. And I totally agree with you, Your Excellency. What came from our conclusion, because IPCC is assessing the research. We are not doing research. We are just assessing, but in a neutral manner. We are not dictating any option to any government. We are just producing option, and it is for any government, depending on their context, as you said, Your Excellency, to implement or not those options. So I think the final decision in their hand. But let me highlight what 6th cycle brought for us. It brought something that is very interesting. The warning, W. And the warning is there, and Your Excellency highlighted many things as warning. We never face, fires coming just from weather. This is a new concept. We never face the accelerated rhythm for extreme events. Many places have a very, huge rain, while the others are facing successive years of drought. We are also facing many problems of migration and all these aspects. So what 6th cycle said, there is warning. Second, there is a hope. The hope is there because there are many solutions, many possibilities that can, if they are used in proper way, they can help in transforming climate change in climate change. Renewable, circular economy, changing the behavior of how we are living. Many aspects we can introduce the concept of climate resilient development. In the same time, you are subscribing to limit emission. You are also improving the quality of life and the air of your country, your city. I am coming from Morocco. We have big city, Casablanca, and believe me, by improving, reducing the emission, we can improve quality of air and diminish all these healthy problems connected to this pollution also. So this is, sometimes you can subscribe to limitation of greenhouse gases, and same time, we are also improving the life and also the quality of life of the population, increasing the wealth and also creating jobs. So this is why I think, and in 6th cycle, the idea of transformation was really in an introduction phase. And this is why this is something that came for the 7th cycle, and it will be introduced deeply. I will just use one paragraph, one key message from 1.5, and it is related to SDGs. And it is iterated because I should read it because it should be, I should read it because it was approved by government. And I should not forget even period. Comma, I should not forget because it was approved. it says that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C can go hand in hand with achieving other world goals, such as achieving sustainable development and eradicating poverty. I think assessment from IPCC are in line with considering SDG. And I think when we look to the 17% progress, it is problematic. But however, we should really invest all what is possible to make progress and to improve the situation. So I will conclude by what is coming in the future for our seventh cycle. We started already the seventh cycle last year. And if sixth cycle was solution oriented, because in sixth cycle of IPCC, it was unique in the history of IPCC when we dealt with three special reports, one about 1.5, one about land, climate change and land, and the other one, climate change and the ocean and cryosphere. So we deviate from traditional, assessment to the one oriented to the business of the life of all the population. It is solution oriented. Now for seventh cycle, and we negotiate well, we will have not the same number of special reports, but we will have cycle oriented more and more to adaptation. We will have our package, normal package, working group 1, working group 2, working group 3, dealing with science, vulnerability and impact, and also mitigation. We will have sensitivity report, but we will have one dedicated to revision to guideline for adaptation, and we will have a sort of guideline dedicated to this new technique about carbon dioxide reduction and capture and so on. So seventh cycle is cycle that should really look for solution that should try as much as possible to think and to provide necessary information for all the countries to have capacity to adapt either the reactive adaptation, what we are adapting now, and the planned adaptation in the future. This is something which is really new and this is excellent. And second, also, seventh cycle should look all the techniques that can help that all the trajectory about climate change stay below this bar 1.5 degree, 2 degree at maximum. So I think with this, all this effort, all this mobilization need a sort of subscription to all the component segment of the population. Or that means we should look for regional balance. We should look for diversity. We should look for the best introduction of indigenous knowledge. And also we should look for how we can improve and we can embark as much as possible youth, and this is, I think, strategy even for IPCC. We should motivate everybody to come and to embark in the work of IPCC. To enter the house of IPCC, it is simple. By self-declaration, you can request all our drafts and you will be a reviewer to send your comments and to contribute to the work of IPCC. IPCC now is also making as much as possible his message as simple as like this accordion, which is the size of one visit card, and also to invite all the policymakers, negotiators, stakeholders, anyone to contribute to this transformation that is requested to push sustainable goal, in the objective that we are looking for. But I will also conclude. And once I conclude, I thank you also, Felix, Mary, and any actor that can really, I want to conclude by this, because either you are coming from any sector, administrative, but you are facing some constraints to invite, to mobilize. Sometimes foundation, have this flexibility to invite, to mobilize, and to facilitate, and to make speedy some procedural aspect that some government cannot implement. And I should salute this collaboration between the Foundation in Chile and the Chilean government. Thank you very much for this, and thank you very much. I'm sorry if I took long, but let me finish my something. This is not a photo of the memory. I came here escorted from outside to here. I came late in the queue, but because I am IPCC, I did have the opportunity to be escorted. I took people to this room. That means people, even security, are paying attention to IPCC.
Thank you so much for your comments, Abdullah, and I fully agree that it's really important also with IPCC that you are reaching out to all kind of interest groups, whether it's youth, whether it's government, so everyone can have their voice heard. I think that's really important when we're talking about climate. And also your appreciation of the funding that is going from foundations to science to policy and how we can bridge that gap. And I think both talking from on behalf of Foundation for Solaris and also the VLOX funding, that is really what we look for, to look at innovative possibilities, to look at new science that can move to policy, and hopefully with that contribution reach the 2030 targets quicker than anticipated. With that, I want to give the word to Executive President of Philanthropy Corte Solari, Francesca Corte Solaris, which is co-hosting our event here today. The word is yours. I want to ask you about the private sector key to reaching ambitious agreements, and how, from your perspective, that you feel like philanthropy can play a role. The word is yours.
Thank you. Mi inglés no es muy bueno, así que Patricia Morales va a ser mi traductora. Así que vamos a trabajar ahí en sintonía para poder expresar de la mejor manera posible para que ustedes puedan entender. Primero que nada, muchas gracias por poner este tema tan relevante sobre la mesa, el tema de la filantropía.
Thank you for putting on the table the floor of the philanthropy subject.
Yo llevo 23 años, un poquito más, trabajando en una agenda de educación, cambio climático, conservación.
I've been working for more than 20 years in this agenda, environmental education,
Y puedo
conservation.
decir de que lo que me ha dado eso a nosotros como fundación ha sido la posibilidad de poder partir con una agenda o con un proyecto y tener el tiempo para poder construirlo. Es decir, en 25 años nosotros hemos podido, es decir, si uno piensa en realidad cuántos gobiernos pueden pasar en 25 años,
Yes, and in those 25 years of experience, we have a lot of time to make different things for the different governments.
entonces creo que ahí hay una tremenda ventaja del tiempo, diría yo, de poder tomar proyectos y realmente poder que los proyectos lleguen a un fin y a una conclusión y a algo que sea evidente. Eso ha sido siempre nuestro lema.
Maybe one of the advantages that we have is that we have time to take a project beginning and have enough time to continue all over the time.
Nosotros somos creadores de espacios, de momentos, creadores de sueños, diría yo también.
We are creators of dreaming moments.
Sabemos también de que, y aquí quiero poner algo con mucho ímpetu, sabemos que hoy en día estamos enfrentados a la problemática que todos estamos aquí, que nos convoca. Ese problema, hoy en día estamos enfrentados en una problemática y vemos que hay múltiples agendas en el mundo. Pero en la realidad sabemos que no vamos a cumplir la agenda. lo sabemos, es una realidad, es una verdad. Entonces lo primero es cómo nos hacemos cargo de poner la verdad.
So we have several challenges and multiple agendas in the world, and the first thing is to understand how do we care about truth.
Se entiende que es un tema difícil, pero lo estamos viendo día a día y ya no podemos negar de que en el fondo ya hemos llegado ya a superar los 2 grados de temperatura a nivel mundial.
And we know it's difficult, we have to understand that we are over the 2 we are going to arrive to the 2 degrees Celsius again.
Entonces, la pregunta que uno dice, estamos enfrentados a esta problemática, estamos aquí todos juntos, reunidos, ¿qué vamos a hacer?
So we are here all together, and what are we going to do?
En nuestra experiencia a lo largo de estos 23, 25 años de trabajo,
From our experience, those last 25 years of experience,
creo que lo más importante que hemos destacado o resuelto es el trabajo entre partes distintas.
maybe one of the most important achievements that we have done.
Es decir, hablamos de la
is work
sociedad civil, la sociedad pública, la sociedad privada. Para
between
nosotros-
public, private, and civil society.
Para nosotros el triángulo virtuoso que le llamamos es fundamental para a la hora de cumplir los objetivos.
This is what we name the virtuous triangle.
Por ejemplo, si me voy a Chile
For example, if
y
you
hablamos
go
de
to
las
Chile,
áreas terrestres protegidas. En las áreas marinas protegidas ya llegamos al 30% y un poco más. Pero para llegar a la meta 30-30 necesitamos incorporar los privados. No hay otra solución.
if we want to achieve the 30-30,
Entonces la pregunta que yo me hago, ¿qué estamos esperando para poder también poner... Perdón, la pobre Pati.
So,
Pobre Pati, vamos.
So if we want to achieve the 30-30 target, we really need to work and include the private sector. She was mentioning the experience in Chile in particular, not only in the market because we are already okay with this target, but she was talking about the conservation in the terrestrial area and mentioning that the private sector is really needed.
Entendiendo que obviamente la empresa, el capitalismo, donde hemos estado todos metidos en esta única nave espacial,
Yeah, we do understand that we are all part of this business system and capitalism.
obviamente que también está liderado por los privados, por los empresarios.
And obviously we understand that the private sector is
Entonces,
essential there.
¿cuál es la manera de acercarnos a ellos? La manera es la confrontación
Which is the manner to
o la manera es educar,
which is the manner to deal with the private sector?
acercar,
Should we fight with them or should we
poder
try to
traer a la
include
mesa
them
de
and
trabajo y
bring
resolver
them
las problemáticas en
to the working
conjunto con los
table, to work
líderes que están
together
liderando los grandes lugares o empresas contaminantes del mundo?
and to put all together people in
A
the
ellos son los que
table.
tenemos que traer acá a escuchar también.
This is the people that we need to bring on the table. Those guys.
Yo sí creo en el ser humano.
I do believe in the human being.
Yo sí creo en el amor y la compasión, lo creo.
I do believe in the love and compassion.
Creo que sí, a través de, yo sé que suena a lo mejor un poco como kitsch, ¿ah?
I know it sounds kitsch,
Pero en realidad, ¿cómo vamos a lograr esto con la voluntad?
but how are we
Entre
going to
las
achieve
partes.
this in terms of willingness?
Y cuando hablo de amor, hablo del amor. El amor trasciende muchas cosas.
When I'm talking about love, I'm talking about that love that can go beyond a lot of things.
El amor trasciende el cuidado y cuando uno ya está trabajando en un colectivo, el amor se trasciende a ese colectivo.
I mean that when we talk about love, we talk about the capacity to go beyond.
No
things.
es un amor a mí mismo, sí, ok,
It's not something selfish.
pero cuando ya estamos en otro estado de conciencia, el amor es para los otros, es para la comunidad. Ahí es cuando estamos en otro estado de conciencia.
It means to be in another state of conscious to be able to work with the others.
también contarles que, por ejemplo, y aquí voy a terminar, por ejemplo, la filantropía, en el caso de nosotros en Chile, llevamos 3 años implementando una fórmula en el Family Office.
I also want to explain to you that we are working in our family office also for the last 3 years.
Es decir, cómo hacemos conversar las finanzas con la filantropía, con la sustentabilidad.
Trying to see how can we make a kind of networking and alliance between the financial part and area and the philanthropy.
Claro, acabamos de contratar una gerente general que entra al área de sustentabilidad en el Family Office en la parte de inversiones.
So we now have a sustainability
Hoy en día, después de
director
3
in the
años,
family office.
ya llevamos el 40% de las inversiones ya con alguna certificación.
So now we have 40% of our investment portfolio that has
Es
a
decir,
kind of
se puede.
certification, so it's possible.
De ese Family Office, de mis inversiones y desde a donde yo o de donde la fundación saca el dinero.
So this is where.
Esto no es una empresa. Esto no es responsabilidad social. Esto es entregarse a la vida sin esperar nada a cambio.
To hope that we can do this without expecting anything.
Y ese ha sido mi gran desafío en estos 25 años,
This has been my main challenges.
donde finalmente entiendo que la problemática es económica, social, cultural, problemas de guerra. Y sí, ya estamos en el, ya estamos en el momento preciso, como hablaba Abdalá, es el momento de la preparación. ¿Y qué significa prepararnos? Significa que tenemos que empezar a prepararnos en nuestros lugares. Y eso suena bastante complejo. ¿Cómo nos vamos a preparar si no tenemos la semilla? ¿Cómo nos vamos a preparar si no tenemos agua? ¿Cómo nos vamos a preparar si nuestros jóvenes no tienen idea de lo que es hoy en día, lo que es cultivar la tierra? Ni arreglar un enchufe, ni poner una ampolleta. Es así. Entonces, la responsabilidad de nosotros como adultos, no podemos pretender de que nuestros hijos lo van a resolver.
So we have a huge responsibility. We cannot expect that our kids are going to.
Y eso es lo que a mí me tiene aquí, porque yo sé que a mis hijos no lo van a poder resolver.
Because I know that they will not be able to solve.
Soy yo la que tengo que resolver.
This is my responsibility.
Es mi responsabilidad de enseñar a mis hijos a cuidar el planeta.
I need to learn them how.
No sé si seguirán haciendo lo que yo voy a hacer, lo que yo estoy haciendo. No lo sé, pero lo importante es que yo siento que sí, nosotros como filantropía en nuestro país hemos movido el país. Tal vez es algo que no se ve, pero en la ciencia, en la educación, en la cultura, hemos movido nuestro país desde la filantropía. Y no solamente en Chile, sino hoy en día también hemos podido salir y demostrar que en este triángulo virtuoso podemos hacer grandes cosas, como seguir trabajando con IPCC, WMO durante 5 años. Y con una alianza y con una resonancia y con una empatía, con un cariño, con un amor, donde finalmente nuestro propósito es uno. No hay más propósitos. El propósito es uno solo. Y hacia allá nos tenemos que dirigir y trascender todos nuestros perjuicios, fuera juicios y perjuicios. Aprendamos a mirarnos con los ojos del corazón. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Francesca. You showed, you talked about how important it is to have adaptation as one of your key issues, but also how to cooperate with sectors and how we as philanthropists can make a difference. But that it is a personal choice that everyone can make, and it's also a choice that we can affect everyone with the funding and the initiatives that we are initiating. I think that is a really good way that we have to the southern approach to this, and that is why we also work together as a north-south perspective on this environmental and UN processes with the implementation of them, that we come from separate part of the world, but that we are still bridging the gap. And with that, I want to give the word to Giuliano Cadano, your ambassador, head of Environment, Climate Change and Ocean Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile. And as Latin America has developed pioneering initiatives in oceanographic and terrestrial conservation, I want to just ask you from your perspective, how you think that the region can turn the corner in terms of environmental action over the last 20 years, and how you can continue to lead on this issue. What is yours?
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, and thank you very much to Pia Solari for the invitation to participate in this event. And I think the question has some resonance around some progress that we've been trying to make in Latin America, but at the same time, I think I will also sort of use the phrases and the ideas that the minister and the representative from the IPCC were saying, that we are in fact in a situation of very deep crisis. We are facing a crisis of climate change, a crisis of loss of biodiversity, and crisis of pollution. And Latin America and the Caribbean is not strange to that crisis. And I think, first of all, Latin America is a special region from that perspective, because we have among us some of the most biodiversity rich countries in the world, and Chile is also one of them. We are not maybe as diverse as other countries in the region, but we are very much in the ocean. We have one of the richest areas of biodiversity in the oceans in the world. So that also carries a lot of responsibility, and but at the same time, we need not to forget about the difference between the levels of responsibility and the levels of capabilities between the North and South. That at the same time cannot be a hurdle, a barrier that will stop us from collaborating. I think the main challenge today is to try to see how the inequalities of the world will not prevent us from achieving our responsibilities and achieving solutions that are as concrete as we can. Biodiversity, climate change are global issues, and therefore they need global responses, and everybody needs to be committed in that regard. The best plan that we have for climate change is called Paris Agreement, and we need to implement the Paris Agreement. Implementing the Paris Agreement is not easy. The Paris Agreement itself is a framework of ideas. It's not a recipe that will go to the detail of every step that we need to take. But that's precisely what multilateralism is about. How do we translate the political vision, the political proposal of the Paris Agreement into concrete measures? And the IEA, the International Energy Agency, they made an estimation of how much would we improve if we fully implemented what we agreed in Dubai in COP28, and especially in paragraph 28 of the decision of the global stocktake. The paragraph 28, for those that are not familiar with it, refers to tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, addressing transport and steering away from fossil fuels, and all those things put together. If you put those in a graph and have an estimation of the impact, then only by applying those measures, we would be back on the track of 1.5. So, and this is the estimation of the IEA. And what I'm saying is that the recipes are there, the solutions exist, and now we need to implement them with all the complexities that exist. In the case of biodiversity is much more complicated because maybe the multilateral framework of biodiversity and climate change have not been developing in the same track, and that is a problem. And especially about when I think about finance, probably the climate change regime has taken a different perspective and has achieved some outcomes and some and established some institutionality around it. We have the Green Climate Fund, and we have the mobilization of funds from many sources, and maybe some of that should be also reflected in the biodiversity arena. This year we have a very important opportunity both in Cali, in Colombia, when we will be able to develop and to make progress in implementation of the global biodiversity framework. That includes, of course, important elements about finance. But also in climate change, this year we will have the opportunity to establish a new collective and quantified goal mobilization of finance that is definitely going to tap into all these different sources, and where collaboration between the public and the private is absolutely central. There's no other way around it. Everybody needs to collaborate. And this is very simple, as I was saying before, for global problems, global solutions. And global solution is not only about including all the governments, but it's also about including everyone in society. It is impossible to think that only public money will solve all these issues. It's impossible. And in fact, it's going to be a minor component. Most of the finance for climate change and for biodiversity will come from existing flows of finance, which are mostly private. So we need to make sure that every time a company makes a decision about investment, at the same time takes into consideration and is compatible with the protection of biodiversity and with a low carbon economy. And that is not easy. That is not easy. It's not easy for governments, because governments will have to somehow influence those financial flows. But it's not easy also for companies and for the private sector, because there are no incentives yet in the market. There are no clear guidelines. The same level of transparency that governments need to comply with in their climate reports does not exist at the level of the private sector. So private sector struggles with trying to prove that their investments are actually climate resilient or in line with a 1.5 world. But we need to make progress in that regard. Here in the United Nations, there have been important commissions that have created in order to precisely to bring the private sector into this effort. But still, some way forward needs to be found. And I think this is we are living exciting times. As much as I couldn't agree more that we are in deep problem. We are in a deep problem. In biodiversity and climate change and everything. But at the same time, I think we need to rebel against pessimism, and we need to say, as the IPCC said a few years ago, if we don't get 1.5, let's fight for 1.6. If we don't get 2 degrees, let's fight for 2.1, because every degree counts. And the same thing goes for biodiversity. 1/4 of all the species in the world are threatened to extinction. But if we don't get the 20%, the 25%, let's fight for the 26%. So I think moving those efforts, I think, is absolutely crucial to achieve this. And I cannot stop by saying, Chile, we have been trying to lead the way in a way with our example. We have still a long way to go. About 21, 26, 22% of our land is protected, so we still have a space to improve in achieving 30 by 30. But in the ocean, we are over 30%. We are already achieved 43% of our protection, of the protection of our water. But that's only this is just to show how complex all this is. We have created marine protected areas for the 43% of our jurisdictional waters. But this is just the first step. Second step is to create, management plans. The third step is to, implement those management plans in a manner that is sustainable for the future. And again, here we cannot just rely on public resources. This has to be undertaken as a commitment from the whole of society. And this is why I was talking to think about the creation in Chile of a nature fund that will try to gather and to bring together different sources of funding for nature in Chile. For the ocean is a very important moment as well. Let's not forget that most biodiversity that exists in the world is in the ocean or comes from the ocean. So it's extremely important that we protect the ocean. And this year, last year, the BBNJ agreement was open for signature. Chile is very proud to be one of the first signatories and one of the first countries that ratified it. We have 8 countries that have ratified the BBNJ agreement. We need 60 to enter into force. So please, anybody and we will convey this message to everyone. We need more countries to ratify the BBNJ agreement so we can start protecting the high seas, which is absolutely critical for the health of the planet. Chile, we have not only signed and already ratified the BBNJ agreement, we are also working on the first MPA that we hope that will be presented for the BBNJ COP when this starts working. And that is an area that is in front of the coast of Chile, which is the Nazca and Sally Gomez Reach. Again, this is one of the most biodiverse places in the world, declared an EPSA by the CBD. And we hope that we will be able to count with the support of everyone, not only governments, but also civil society and observers and stakeholders to make this the first MPA under BBNJ. This week in New York, we are launching also an initiative that will try to bring together other countries that are also championing other MPAs in the high seas. So again, this logic that it's not 1.5, 1.6, it's not. So with this logic, if we don't get 30 by 30, at least we will get 28 or 29 or as close as we can. If we don't get it by 2030, we will get it by 2031. So let's rebel against pessimism. We're trying to rally all these countries that can champion high seas MPAs for the BBNJ agreement. And hopefully we will support each other, we will share experiences, and we will try to bring this portfolio of MPAs in the high seas for the attention, for the consideration and adoption at the BBNJ COP in the near future. So trying to do it as much as we can, but at the same time, again, this is a global effort and this requires everyone's.
Thank you so much, Julio. And I think it was timely that you mentioned the BBNJ agreement, that we still, even though we are facing a lot of challenges and we have a planet that is sort of burning, if we could say it like that, we still managed to, after many, many years, to adopt the BBNJ agreement. We have this plastic treaty that is coming up, which hopefully will be adopted this year. The negotiation hopefully finishes here in 2024. So I think that even though we're talking about that, are the UN, working to its full potential? And I think, from a foundation point of view, it really is, because there's a lot of new initiative that is sort of bridging the gaps between the different conventions that we have. And I think the BBNJ is one of them, for sure. but also the new plastic treaty. We started off with a lot of push from the Nordic countries on the mandate for the plastic, which started with, oh, look how much ended up in the ocean. How can we actually combat that? And then get a treaty out of it and have a more circular economic approach to plastic. So I think it's really timely to look at that, and that's why I want to give the word to Valerie, you're Global Director of Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy. And I was just wondering how you see that, advancing science, disseminate the latest research and information, how that can contribute to transformative change, and how that also can contribute to implementing the obligations we have with the UN processes, whether it's the CBD, the Paris Agreement, or whether it will be the new BBNJ.
No, thank you so much, Charlotte. And I have to say, this is my first event, my first panel here at UNGA, and it's actually giving me hope, because for once we are talking about solutions, and we're rebelling against the idea that all we talk about is the problem. Because we are very comfortable talking about the problem. And as you hear from every single person on this panel, we have the solutions, we just need to implement. And that includes implementing the science and the data we have, but recognizing it takes money, because His Excellency Minister Navarro started with that, it's going to take money. That's of course why the World Bank gets invited to these sorts of meetings to talk about the money. So I want to do that, but I want to very quickly answer the call to speak truth that Francisca gave us, because there's two things we have to be honest about. Maybe three things. One, we have the authorizing environment. We have the Paris Agreement. We have the new BBNJ. We have the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We even have a new global framework on chemicals to fight pollution. So we have the authorizing environment. So let's get comfortable taking yes for an answer. But we need to be honest that we don't set ourselves up for failure. The SDGs, Charlotte, you mentioned them at the beginning, and of course, we're sitting here in the UN building, the SDGs matter. Finland is currently at the top of the table in achieving the SDGs at home, because one of the innovations of the SDGs was this was not just a poor country game, this is a game for everybody. But the truth is, if everybody lives like Finland, or Sweden, or Denmark, who's number 3, we would need 3 planet Earths. We can't do it. We cannot do in the 21st century what we did in the 20th century, which is grow now, clean up later. So we have to think differently. And I think the second truth that's important is we are living in a moment of deep, deep debt distress. And there's an affordability crisis everywhere, including in this country, the richest country on the planet. And so when we talk about money, there isn't a lot of it to go around. And that's an important reality that we can't pretend doesn't exist either. But I want to sort of provide 3 very, what I hope, Minister Navarro, you'll accept will be concrete proposals when it comes to money. The first one really is around needing to make money go further, because there just isn't enough of it. There's never going to be enough money, whether it comes from domestic public budgets, which at the end of the day is the majority source of money, whether it's for the SDGs or for the Global Biodiversity Framework or for decoupling climate from growth. There's never going to be enough money from the private sector, because at the end of the day, the private sector, for all we wish otherwise, is in the business of making money, not making the world a better place. We just hope they can do both, make more money by making the world better. And of course, money comes from international public institutions, from philanthropies, multilateral development banks like the World Bank and others. But there's just not enough money to go around. And in fact, too much of the money is flowing out of countries. Globally, there's $500 billion spent in paying the debt on loans just from the global south. That's $500 billion sent to the global north. There's not $500 billion, certainly not in overseas development assistance, sent to the global south. So think about these things. So we need to make the money go further. And one of the best ways to do that is to work on subsidies. For a long time, nobody wanted to talk about subsidies. The world is spending $1.5 trillion a year directly on subsidies that are warming the planet and destroying biodiversity. Just agricultural subsidies alone, it's over $600 billion a year. Only, by the way, a third of which go to farmers is responsible directly for 14% of illegal deforestation. 14%. 14 million hectares every year cut down because of subsidies. And that's money that the governments don't have to spend. So why are governments spending money on one hand that they don't have? And then they have to spend more money on the other hand to fix the problems that the first money created. Why can't we repurpose those subsidies, make sure those same farmers still get access to the same amount of money, but to do better things that don't result in more pollution, less biodiversity, and more greenhouse gases in the air? And I have to say, Chile has not just signed up to the BBNJ, which is critical, but you've also ratified, excuse me, the World Trade Organization subsidy reform on fisheries. And I hope Panama will come next in ratifying that, because this is the world's first effort through the WTO. It's the second ever only agreement at the WTO, the first ever environmental agreement, and it reforms subsidies. The 22 billion fishery subsidies every year that are perverse. So we have to get this ratified quickly. So we have to work on subsidies. The second thing we do after we make money go further, because once you reform subsidies, private sector will start making the right decisions, Julio, because they will be forced to. They won't be paid to make bad decisions anymore, which is what we're doing now. Then we have to make money more accessible. We hear again and again, and we have to start doing something about it. Places like the Amazon, less than 2% of all international finance that goes to save the Amazon goes to the indigenous peoples or goes to local farmers who actually are there every day and have to actually manage and save the Amazon. That doesn't make sense. We have to make it more accessible. And that's not always easy. It's not easy for an indigenous community living, let's say in the state of Amazonas in Brazil, to suddenly have the kind of financial management systems that we at the World Bank will be comfortable with to give them money. But let's at least make sure that the countries and the communities who need access to this money can get access to funds like the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and others. And the simplest way to do this is to reform the paperwork. Reforming subsidies isn't easy, I don't pretend it is. But why on earth can we not reform the paperwork to make GEF and GCF and climate investment funds more accessible? I've been working in this business for 25 plus years. It started when I was 3. And I've worked with a lot of countries trying to access GEF funds and GCF funds. So, I mean, I have a PhD and I work with a lot of people with PhD. We can't figure out what they're asking for. How on earth do you expect low-income countries or communities to do this? Let's fix the paperwork. That for sure we should be able to. We need to make the money more accessible. And then finally, we need to make the money more impactful. And Charlotte, this specifically gets to your point about data and science. You know, we don't have the data and analytics that's necessary to make a difference. Too much of the data and analytics that is supported is done for PR reasons, for public relations, to prove there's a problem. We are not funding data and analytics for decision making. And that's what's needed. Not more data and analytics to tell us the world is on fire. We know it's on fire. And that's why at the World Bank, we talk about AAA data. Data that, first of all, is accurate. There's too much data out there that is not accurate. We have to fix that. And that's where the community of scientists and philanthropy who funds that needs to make sure we're working with the right data. It's up to date. One of the reasons the financial sector and private companies don't invest in data, don't invest in biodiversity or in decoupling investments from climate emissions is they don't have the data to know how, and they don't have the data in time for their quarterly financial report to say they're making a difference. The second A is about availability. Data has to be available. That doesn't mean just putting it on a website somewhere that's nobody heard of it. It certainly doesn't mean putting it on a shelf in someone's office of the 50th floor of the UN that no one can access. It means making sure not just that the data is available everywhere, but it's people know where to find it, and it makes sense to people. So many of the people we're trying to influence don't know what a ton of greenhouse gas emissions of carbon dioxide equivalent means. They don't even know what CO2e means. I tell you what, I don't think everyone around this table can probably define it or would define it the same way. Can we please start talking in terms that are accessible to everyday people? And we have to make sure, finally, that data and analytics are affordable. One of the big problems in the world right now is we've got lots of data and analytics for places like the US, from Europe, from parts of East Asia, from parts of Latin America, because you have some of the best research institutions in the world. But lots of Africa is dark. We don't know what's happening there. And it's because to fund the kind of analysis of data that's needed, we don't have the money. The money isn't given. We need to make sure data and the analytics to turn that data into decision making is affordable. And that's why for us at the World Bank, we want to be part of the solution, recognizing there isn't enough money to go around, recognizing that money is expensive, and there are lots and lots of needs in the world. Francisca talked about the importance of education. I couldn't agree with her more. We live in a world where 70%, 7 out of 10, 10-year-olds can't read or write. Tell me how we're going to educate folks about the dangers of climate change if they can't read, if they can't write their congressman, their politician, and do something about it. But we need to make the money we have go further. We need to make sure that it's accessible to the people who need it when they need it. And we need to make sure that decisions made on how, where, and when, with whom to spend the money is built on good data. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And I think it's really valuable what you're saying, that money has to go further, and that is why I think it's really important that it's public and private, philanthropy, and but also businesses that goes together and find funding for these issues. Yeah, whether it's in north or south. I mean, we're all together on this, and like that was also said by Julia, was that it's a global issue. We all are in together, so we all have responsibility. And I think also with education, like Francesca was saying, education is so important. Like you said, also, education is, what brings the issues, people to understand what is at stake, what solutions do we have, how can we adapt to live in the environment that we have now. And that is where education is really valuable and vital. And so Sam Barrett, you're Chief in Youth Education and Advocacy in UNEP. So I think it's really timely that you have the word, because you work a lot on youth education, how we can bring youth into this discussion. And in the time of global economic and political social crisis, how do you see that UNEP can make a contribution to combat the triple crisis? I mean, your conventions are so broadly. I mean, you have, like Valerie was also mentioning, chemical, Stockholm Convention, it's part of UNEP, the plastic treaty will be a part of UNEP soon. So how do you see that youth can play a role in this?
Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge, like Julio, you talked about rebelling against pessimism. Patricia, you spoke about love, which is a word we don't hear very often, and we need to hear more of it, I think, particularly right now. And then Mr. Navari talked about passion as well. And two other words I think are important are vulnerability, and the other one I think is around optimism. So if you're vulnerable, you're open to being wrong or right, and you're open to learn, and you're open to lead as well. And I think there's something for me about when we enter that space of being vulnerable, then I think we can go more profoundly into ourselves, because leadership is 3 journeys. It's the journey inside, and it's the journey with others, and it's the journey into the world. And so if we're vulnerable, then we can open up those pathways. So we don't invest in being right, but we invest in working with others genuinely to collaborate, to kind of make the world we need it to be. So I'm going to try and answer the question that was based around the session about philanthropy in the UN. And I spoke to a friend of mine this morning who runs a very successful philanthropy organization. And I said to him, Ian, the UN and philanthropy, how are we doing? What could we do differently? And he said, the UN might not be value for money, but it's value for impact. like pound for pound, what you can get by investing in the UN, I think is quite precious and quite special. And so if you've got $1 million here versus $1 million there, you can work what we can do with it. I think there's some interesting kind of maths in there. Humility is a problem on both sides. So there's an ego in the room around what does philanthropy want? But then also, how does philanthropy get treated as a genuine partner as opposed to an investor in an opportunity? And I think there's a difference there to think through. But I think for me, the UN also needs to be working better together with philanthropy. So it's focusing on a mission as opposed to a project. And then how do we open up to a mission-based mindset as opposed to delivering on a set of outcomes? And I think for me, change happens when you think about it in a systemic way around all the different levers that you can bring together to kind of pull. And not one person can make change on their own. We can only make change together. And so for me, there's a magic in philanthropy and the UN working more closely together with nation states, with NGOs, with indigenous peoples, and with young people. Think about how does that system click and how do those cogs work? And how do you work quietly, loudly, to achieve different things in different ways? So I wanted to talk about what do I think we could focus on? And I was just going to say 3 things quickly. One is the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework. We need to get $30 billion into that. And we need to do that quickly to really kind of get nature the investment that it needs. I think the plastics treaty could potentially be really big. I mean, that's looking at the whole value chain of production of plastic. So from everything from the crackers that make the plastics with all the emissions to the FMCG use of plastics, which touches consumers' hands every single day. Then what happens next to plastics, which causes so much damage. So this is a treaty that we think is really profound because it's going not just downstream, but upstream as well. And I think that's what makes it different. And that needs money to deliver on that level of ambition. And the last one is the adaptation finance. The gap on adaptation is massive. And climate change isn't tomorrow, it's today. And what we're seeing, whether it's floods in Europe, it's what's happening in the Sahel. That needs lots of money and needs it money now. What Valerie was saying about the financial challenge, we need to think creatively about how we unlock money in a different way. But I think we all can agree on the what. I think that's the easier part of the question, but it's the how that I think we need to spend time on. And I was with a number of UN agencies yesterday. We all agree there's all these whats that we could do together, but it's the how that I think we get stuck on. And I think having a mission focus on how to be on missions and really build high ambition coalitions that are willing, that are prepared to work differently together with a mixture of partners and open leadership. So we're open-hearted, open-handed in how we operate. I think that's how we can work. And I think the INC mission shows what we can do, and there's more missions we can work on. And I think the GBF, Astrid, I think it's got so much potential. People are so hungry for this. Like nature has a different status. And if we fight for nature, we fight on so many other fronts as well. The second one I'd say is, I think we really need to collaborate in a different way, much more radically about what we're prepared to give and take, and just be much more selfless in our leadership. So we don't have to be seen as the person, the brand, the logo, but we work on this in a way that's genuinely public service oriented and genuine public spirited. And I think on the radical collaboration, there's a range of things I'm starting to see that gives me a sense of possibility. And I think there's just one thing I'll say is like, the thing that matters to me is what I've stopped seeing. So I've stopped seeing swifts fly over our gardens. I've stopped seeing frogs in the garden. One I saw this year. And there's things I've stopped seeing that make me realize actually it's the absence we need to notice. Because when you stop seeing things, that becomes the new baseline and it shifts up and down. And so I think noticing is really important. One thing I have noticed here is just the absence of younger people on this panel. And I think we need to get young people in the room and invest in them. And I think we need to be careful. We don't say young people can solve everything, because that's not fair. That pressure will not help them. There's enough anxiety that they feel, I think, that's a problem. We need to make them powerful, not powerless in this dynamic. But this week, over the past few days, we've had some remarkable conversations around green jobs and green skills, about how with India, with Armenia, with Cyprus, they're all making new commitments about how they invest in the next generation of the workforce, about how education has to be different. What we're teaching is no longer fit for the purpose or fit for the century. I think that needs to be re-engineered. But also we talk about policy, but not politics. So how do we invest in the next advocates of the future that have the leadership competencies to really think about how they use their agency in the room and can not just represent young people, but make asks on behalf of young people so they can serve the we, not the I. And so just spending time this week with UNICEF around what do they do? What does UNEP do? What more could we do? So we create a real movement for youth leadership that I think can unlock things. So Sally Robinson was downstairs earlier, and I don't know if anyone's read Ministry of the Future, but it's a book that speaks to me. Mary's the hero of that book, who does things very different. And she is a radical diplo-activist. Because you can be a diplomat and you can be an activist. You don't always have to be one thing, you can be two things. And the way that she thought about how the world could change, I think gives us so much source for hope. So I would say that I think I will see more swifts again because nature can recover them. I think I will see more frogs again because nothing speaks. And we just need to give nature a chance to come back. And but we need to work with people to serve the planet, not just the planet, to serve the people. And that's the dynamic we need to work through. So I would say we do need to rebel against pessimism. We need to think about love in our hearts all the time, but we need to be passionate. But also, I think there is a lot that's going to be exciting around this. And if we're fatalistic, it just paralyzes us. We lean back, not lean in. And I think at UNEP, our role is to be radical collaborators with everyone in the room to see what we can do. And philanthropy has got so much to give. But if we have a mission focus, then I think we can achieve a lot more if we can work together. So thank you for inviting me. And I look forward to seeing you next.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I think, you know, High Ambition Coalition and working together. And I think that goes, you know, between the public, private sector and UN entities, secretariats. I think that's, you know, why we instigated the mission that we have as two foundations from the North or South to actually contribute to the UN processes, getting more private sectors involved in the discussion, getting funding sort of tunnel towards the UN processes. Hopefully that will make a difference. And you talked about young people and nature. And I think that's really interesting because I want to give the word to Katja. And Katja is a Museum for the United Nations. She works there. And I think that, well, we need to give young people the voice, but we also need to give nature the voice. And I think what Katja is presenting right now is really giving, you know, the voice to nature. Katja, the word is yours.
Thanks a lot, and I'll stand up just for the day.
Should I move these a little bit?
Yeah, just move those a little bit. I'm just going to start with some of you might wonder, what the hell is the museum doing? You know, and just for you to know that the Museum for the United Nations is not a building. It is a catalyst for cultural experiences. So we organize partners around popular culture to curate cultural experiences because we know that if we want to see the change that we need, a lot of people need to change behaviors. And not just their own, you know, what do I consume? What do I ask for? How do I vote? But also the bigger system change. We need to reach and engage with the many people. A lot of these discussions here, and I have a background in the UN. Don't know how many agencies I work for. I've also been out in the real world with private sector and NGOs and all of that. But I know that sometimes when we talk here, we speak our UNEs, we speak our economies, we speak all of that, and nobody understands. We need to move. And we need a lot of people to move. How do we do that? What is the biggest change that we can see? It is through popular culture. Music, film, gaming, sports, food, fashion. That's where we hit people's heart and open the heart for the change that we need to see among the many. That's what we do at UNI. Look at behavior change science, see how popular culture affects that in a positive direction. Because let me also say, the dark forces have invested in culture forever. The good forces have been a lot more focused on technical. We need that too. But if we don't move people's heads and hearts, we won't move their hands or their feet or their wallets or anything like that. So let's get to more. So, I have a question for you. Do you know who the oldest, most underpaid artist in the world is?
Nature.
It's nature. 4.6 billion years old and never got paid for her sounds or any resource, any other resource. Until April this year. UN Live, the Museum for the United Nations, started together with musicians in Colombia and young people in Colombia 5 years ago, started a collaboration between musicians, indigenous peoples in the diaspora, recording nature sounds, taking nature sounds, mixing them into dance tracks, music, and won the Grammys. We could see that that had legs. So UN Live, having a name like the UN is great when you want to convene. Got the streaming station, streaming platforms, got the musicians, got the environmental organizations, got a lot of people around the table that could say, well, how can we crack this? Nature never got paid for this. In April this year, the first non-human artist ever came on the big streaming platforms. It's on Spotify. Get your QR code so you can be a friend of nature. Has 100 sounds from nature, all the ones that people listen to. Nature sounds is the most streamed element on any streaming platform. The wind, the waves, the rain, the thunder, all of that. We listen to it all the time. It's called functional noise, which I feel is a little offensive. But okay, so now nature owns its own sounds. Also, we got 15 big artists from different areas of the world. Bombay Steady, Blinky Bill, Ellie Goulding, Brian Eno featuring David Bowie, Mer, Aurora, Ayub Jan from India, big artists in the different markets to mix nature's nature sounds into their hits and their music. And when nature's nature sounds are streamed and when music featuring nature's nature sounds are streamed, royalties go back to nature. We hack the system. This program is called Sounds Right, because it sounds right. It will raise a lot of funding to conservation, and it will engage 600 million people doing what they already do and what they already love. Listen. We need to meet people where they are, in their earbuds, on their screens, on their football fields, with messages that they can understand, through people they trust, and with things they can do. Else we're not going to move this world at the pace we need. So now, what happened, launched in April, in 2 weeks, nature was in the top 1% of artists on Spotify Live. This week, we reached 60 million streams, which is pretty cool. And now, the bigger artists and other artists, they are contacting us because nature's up here. Now everybody wants to play with nature. So this is just one example of how we can take popular culture, reach people, embrace popular culture, and reach the really many people. It's one example of what UN Live does. We have an upcoming program in India. It's called dope. And I thought, you know, like the old UN person came and said, is that political correct to call something dope? I said, okay, we focus group to the young people love it. And they want to be dopers because dope stand for defenders of planet Earth. It is about what ordinary people can do of extraordinary things. So we work with Bollywood. We work with the big streaming station. Can't mention names yet. And it's a light entertainment show. And before you wrinkle your nose, because I know everybody likes to say that they watch documentaries, and we know from data that nobody does. But we also know that foundations love to invest in documentaries because it sounds good. But a light entertainment show that's a little more cookie than spinach, that's what the many millions of people will be watching. So we got the funding for the production, and now we're building the engagement arm that will engage at least 50 million people. And that's just in India, and then we take it global. We need to do these things. So here's my 3 things to philanthropy. Go big or go home. Because if we don't go big and try to reach the many, we can be talking for the next many years and we're not going to. Take the risk of doing something you've not done before. Don't wrinkle that nose to popular culture. Because when we look at an element of like a program like Sounds Right, it's conservation. And let me say the money that's raised are distributed for conservation programs in the 6 biggest biodiversities in the world, including the Amazon. It has an education component. It works with, it goes to the front line, indigenous peoples. The people who decide on this are indigenous people and biodiversity experts. The program in India also has that mechanism. So take the risk, do something you've not done before that can have the effect that we need. And then 3, we need to collaborate. And, you know, public, private, philanthropy, and we also need culture. And I have to say, that is, if we do not embrace popular culture, we are not going to solve the issues. Popular culture alone can't do it. We need the collaboration, we need the tech fixes, we need the convention. But if we do not have culture, I can guarantee you, the dark forces will win. Because we are up against people who do not want to see this change because they're here for short-term gains and the planet can burn. People, it's planet, and it's a change. So now I have a technical test. Yes, I want to show you that we gotta see that these ones will speak to each other. Stay connected. Okay, we're connected. Yay. Yeah, just on a sec. I gotta go in here and I gotta press this one. And then I gotta do like this, and then we don't have sound. So be quiet.
Imagine as these sounds.
I will see that the connection is not.
Receive funds for her conservation. Nature itself officially. That's out.
And I can take that QR code then? Okay, and then you become a friend of nature.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Katja. I think this is a very good way of connecting with the young people, and also with all of us. That Mother Nature finally have her own voice. I think this is excellent. So before we close, we want to give the word to Michael. Michael is a United Nations legal officer and co-founder of the Global Center for Human Change. Michael will present the work of the Global Center and explain how a global alliance can act as a platform to bring together stakeholders and support new ways of thinking. Because what was a common thread between all of the discussions we were here, where we were optimistic, some of us, we knew that we could achieve something if we worked together, but we also were aware that we had to transform the way we live. So, Michael, the word is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte, and well, special thanks to you and Tricia for spearheading these events, and really pleased to be part of it and to be taking part in this this panel. I know we're running out of time existentially and logistically, but I hope I can pick up on some of the themes that have been mentioned here today, and certainly some of the passions. You know, the need to work together, create synergies, meeting people where they're at. I love what Sam was saying about noticing what is absent. I mean, these are all very important factors. Sorry, I also have to premise my comments as we do traditionally here by saying that these are my personal comments. They're not the views of the United Nations. So let me say that also as well. But it's certainly been informed by the 17 years that I've been here, and also previously as a government delegate. So there's some important questions that we've been asking. How do we speak the truth? How do we rebel against pessimism? How do we give nature a chance? In many of the processes that we're involved in, we hear a lot of discussion about gaps. So for climate change, of course, we have the emissions gap, we have the commitment gap, we have the financing gap. And this analysis has been applied to many different challenges, including the SDGs as a whole. Now, this type of analysis reflects a certain type of thinking, or level of thinking, as we would say. It says that we know the way to manage the planet. It says that we understand the changes that are taking place now. And it says that we can take a snapshot of that situation. It will remain stable. And we just need to throw the right management tools at it. And of course, none of this is happening. What we really need to be talking about is the transformation gap. This is the gap between the level of change that we need to be at if we are to have a future here on the planet and the level that we're at now. And the level that we're at now, we know very well. The formula is well known. We're going to reduce a certain behavior by a certain percentage relative to a certain baseline by a certain date in the future. Now, this formula has been called a lot of different things. Kicking the can down the street, buying more time, mortgaging our future. But really, it's a negotiation with the planet. It needs us to be changing at a certain level. And we're saying we're doing this much. And this is a negotiation we're guaranteed to lose. There's no evidence that it's working, and there's no evidence that the snapshots that we are taking are remaining stable. They're changing every week. And now we're running out of time. By every reputable account, we have only a few more years to get this right. So this is the transformation gap. Now, the problem was very clearly articulated by Einstein many years ago. He said that the significant challenges that we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking that we were at when we created them. It really all boils down to this, our level of thinking, the way humans think and the way humans have thought for thousands of years. And until we address that real issue, that core issue, we are just kicking the can down the street, hoping that someone else will fix the problem, and maybe that technology will come up with a solution. All the while, we're just creating new problems. We're trying to solve our challenges at the level of the problem rather than the level of the mind that created those problems. And recycling is a very, very illustrative example. So we have a framework for climate. We have a framework for biodiversity. We'll soon have likely a framework for plastic pollution. What we need is a framework for human thinking, for transformative change. One that will support new ways of thinking about the planet and restoration of the Earth and its ecosystems. Now, the good news is that some groups and individuals have been working on these frameworks for over a decade. These frameworks facilitate new understanding, new levels of thinking, so that we can begin to see our challenges from a new level and the way that we might solve them. This project actually began in 2015 when the SDGs were first being finalized. And our office was part of an interagency consultancy, and we were asked to assess the SDGs against 3 criteria. The first criterion was, were the challenges truly global in nature? And that was fairly easy to determine. We could take a look at where these challenges were located and whether they were local or regional or global. That was fairly easy to determine. The second criterion was whether or not they were progressive, meaning were they advancing the goalposts beyond what had already been said in resolutions and declarations and treaties. The third criterion was whether or not what was being proposed was transformative. Now, the near unanimous conclusion from all these different agencies, and it was UNEP and IMO and DESI, all the large agencies, was we don't know. That the UN did not have a framework against which to determine whether or not something was transformative. Now, of course, the 2030 agenda went ahead, the SDGs went ahead, and the motto is to transform our world for the better by 2030. But this problem remained. So there's a group of experts that came together at the time to try to explore what this might be. What might be a transformative framework? And they began researching and studying, and it actually didn't take that long because it was soon discovered that some of these frameworks had already been in development for many years. So they went to work and they began to create a framework that could exist alongside the SDGs. And it was a human framework, a way for human change to take place alongside the SDGs. And it became 17 Sustainable Development Goal alignments, 17 SDGAs, one for each one of the SDGs. And it was a way of thinking about the SDGs from a different level and the way that we might solve those challenges. To align ourselves to the root of the problem, not where the problem was in the outer world, but where it begins in the way we think. Since then, more frameworks have been developed and trialed and tested, and they've been the subject of country projects and workshops and presentations, courses and programs at universities, and one of them also became a UN publication. So at this point, there's a total of 5 core frameworks that have been developed to support transformative change for people and planet. These frameworks are each supportive of the other, but they're designed to facilitate transformative change for different groups and individuals. And there's a 6th framework that's also being developed for restoration of the Earth and its ecosystems. What is being proposed is the establishment of a global alliance for the scaling up and sharing of these transformative frameworks. The platform would be modeled on some of the global alliance projects that some of you might already be familiar with to address specific issues. There's the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. The aim of the Global Alliance will be to support new ways of thinking about the planet and our global challenges and restoration of the Earth and its ecosystems. It will bring together the stakeholders with the frameworks and the processes needed to support new levels of thinking. So the core message today, and we've heard a number of them, is the need for synergies, the need to address gaps. We're running out of time. We need to bring these processes together. We need the money to go further. Another message is that if philanthropy is to play a role in supporting the work of groups and individuals that are helping to restore balance between humans and nature, then it needs a framework to be able to identify which of those are truly transformative. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. And as many have been saying, we don't have time anymore for shooting in the dark. With these frameworks, it's now possible to change the way we think about our global challenges and the planet And in so doing, we begin to understand more about the ways that we can restore Earth and its ecosystems, which will in turn bring us into a new association with the planet. Or as the Secretary General has been saying, end the war and make peace with nature. So the simple take home is that if we don't change the way we think about the planet, we simply won't have a future here. It's that simple and it's that clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much all for attending. I think this is going to be the end of our program. It's been very rewarding and interesting to listen to all of you. We, on behalf of Philanthropy for Solari Mary Foundation and Velux Funding, I am so pleased that you joined us on this journey. And our journey continues with supporting the UN processes, finding ways to transform and combat marine pollution. You're part of the solutions for the environmental agenda. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you so much for staying here for 2 hours. And we look forward to contribution, further contributions with all of you. We would like to take a photo of all of us together. We think that will be really relevant, the ones that are here. Unfortunately, the ones that are listening online, they can't be a part of it, but virtually, I think they can imagine what it's like. Thank you so much.